Ready? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the 8th meeting of the Committee of Status of Women. We are just getting started a few seconds late here, but I would like to thank everybody for joining us. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Tuesday, February 4th, the committee will resume its study on intimate partner violence and domestic violence in Canada. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19th, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms, participate on Zoom, and please do not attend. Everyone must maintain at least 2 meters of physical distancing, perhaps or hopefully as well when you're seated. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It's recommended the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, including when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room. Everyone present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer in the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting, but we do remind you if you're switching around, just if you could wipe your station as well, that'd be fantastic. For those participating virtually, I would like to outline a few rules. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for the floor or for this meeting. If you have the choice at the bottom of your screen or of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we'll ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled by the proceedings and verification officers. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to violence and assault. This may be triggering to our viewers with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or if you need help, please advise the clerk. I now want to welcome our first panelists, and thank you so much. I'm just going to ask, can I get the full screen on there? Just one moment, just so I could get everybody. We have on our first panel today from the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, Meseret Heliasis, who is the Executive Director. And please correct me because I do believe I've probably said your last name wrong. From Ending Violence Association of Canada, Erin Whitmore, the Executive Director. And from the Muslim Resource Centre for Social Support and Integration, Yasmin Hussein, who is the Manager for Public Education and Community Programs. So for our first round, what we'll be doing, we'll be offering everybody 5 minutes for your opening comments. When you see me start going like this, that means please wrap it up. I try not to cut you off because I do know that this is a really important topic, but please try to keep your time within that. So I'm going to pass it over right now to the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, Meseret. One moment, Meseret. You're starting, but I do not see. We have a bit of an issue. Your mute button was off, but I could not hear you. So can we check that again? Can you check on your wire? On your wire, you'll find a little piece there, and if you could just see to ensure that the mic is on. Can you check that? Still of a bit of an issue. With what I would like to do then, as they look at it technically, if I could pass it over to the Ending Violence Association of Canada, we'll start with their 5 minutes first, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay, and we'll figure out that difficulty. So I'm going to pass it over to Erin. Erin, you've got 5.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Erin Whitmore, and I am the Executive Director of the Ending Violence Association of Canada. The Ending Violence Association of Canada is a national organization that brings together provincial and territorial gender-based violence networks and organizations from across the country to identify and implement the systemic changes necessary to end gender-based violence. We echo the many excellent recommendations already put forward to the committee in previous sessions, and we want to underline the emphasis that previous witnesses have put on the need for a whole-of-government, cross-sectoral, and cross-jurisdictional approach to addressing gender-based violence, an approach that could be accomplished through the National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Gender-Based Violence. As a national organization, the Ending Violence Association of Canada has the opportunity to hear from its member organizations about the similarities and disparities in services and supports across the country. And we are particularly attuned to the ways in which these inconsistencies are most deeply felt by those most marginalized. As one of over 40 organizations and advocates that contributed to the development of the roadmap for the National Action Plan report that I understand the committee has already received from Women's Shelters Canada, we want to urge the committee to promote timely action on the resourcing and implementation of the National Action Plan and the 100 recommendations already set out in this report. The National Action Plan is more than a tool for addressing the patchwork of services that exist for survivors. It is a framework that has the potential to tackle the root causes of gender-based violence and lessen the systemic inequalities that allow gender-based violence to happen. In addition, we would like to put forward recommendations in 2 areas that our organization is particularly focused on. First of all, we would like to recommend the committee recognize sexual violence and the expertise of sexual assault support centers as an important area to include within its study on domestic and intimate partner violence. Acts of sexualized violence are one tactic of abuse that occur within the context of dating violence, domestic and intimate partner violence, and family violence. While 30% of women report experiencing sexual assault in their lifetimes, the majority of those will be victimized by someone they know. Sexual assault is the 3rd most reported type of violence within relationships after physical assault and threatening behavior, and 20% of women whose intimate partners commit sexual violence against them report experiencing this violence monthly or more within the past 12 months, a finding that is particularly troubling given the severity of this violence. The impacts associated with sexual violence require specialized supports and responses. However, the distinct needs of sexual violence survivors can be overlooked in broader discussions about intimate partner and domestic violence. In addition to the network of shelters and transition houses that provide vital services to survivors across the country, there is also an extensive network of community-based sexual assault centers that provide crisis and long-term counseling, prevention, and education. Community-based sexual assault centers are a central part of the support system available to survivors of domestic and intimate partner violence. However, like shelters and transition houses, these organizations have long been facing funding constraints that make it increasingly difficult to meet the demand for services. For these reasons, we would encourage the committee to include consideration of the distinct needs of sexual violence survivors and the organizations that support them as part of its current and future studies. Secondly, we would like to recommend the committee include in its study consideration of how to better support the needs of frontline community-based anti-violence workers and volunteers within the gender-based violence sector in Canada. To illustrate this point, we have submitted a report we produced in collaboration with one of our partner organizations, ANOVA, that shares the findings of a national survey we conducted in the summer of 2020 involving 376 gender-based violence workers and volunteers. This report documents the ways in which providing frontline support to survivors of violence, particularly during the pandemic, is complex and emotionally difficult work that continues to be largely undervalued. Many of those within the gender-based violence workforce continue to lack access to competitive wages, extended healthcare benefits, pensions, and training opportunities. To be clear, this is not an oversight of the organizations employing those within the sector. Rather, the precarity of this work is an extension of the chronic underfunding of the sector and the systemic devaluing of this form of labor that continues to be overwhelmingly performed by women. Every day that we delay taking action on gender-based violence is another day that we make it even more difficult for those experiencing violence to build the lives, families, and communities they want to create. We urge the committee to emphasize this need for immediate action and to stress the importance of moving beyond gathering recommendations and taking concrete steps towards implementing these recommendations. Thank you.
Very much. And we're now going to turn it back over to Meseret. Do we have everything working there, Meseret?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me? Yes.
You've got 5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mesret Haile Jesus, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, CCFWE. I join you from the unceded and surrendered territory of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin Nation in Ottawa. I'm very honored and blessed to join this committee this afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation. The Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment is the only national nonprofit organization dedicated to address economic abuse through advocacy, education, economic empowerment and policy change. Our work is informed by up-to-date evidence and lived experience. To create the system change, we have convened a national task force for women economic justice. The task force, nationally represented by policymakers, social service staff, financial institutions, community organizations advocating for policy to aid economic abuse victims. From this task force, we have heard financial institution staff tell us that they can be the first line of defense for victims. They have told us their clients open up to them with personal stories and thus can see the first red flags of domestic violence abuse before police, shelters, and lawyer notified. However, financial institutions are missing policies and tools to able to escalate victims' files and help victims. Financial institution has shown their dedication to using innovative tools and combat elder financial abuse, such as flagging and escalating cases. We encourage them to replicate that process for domestic economic abuse survivors as well. Economic abuse impacts 95 to 99% of domestic violence survivors. Economic abuse is underreported and a hidden form of abuse, often accompanied by physical, sexual, and other forms of violence. Women from marginalized groups, including newcomers, refugees, racialized, indigenous women, are high risk of economic abuse due to systemic factors. The economic instability caused by this abuse is the top reason that women cannot leave abusive relationship and why they often go back to the abusive relationship after forced separation. Survivors struggle to rebuild their life after abusers has damaged their financial standing because abuser will take out credit card loans in the victim's name and steal and spend their money. Last year, during COVID-19 pandemic, the CCFWE conducted a national study on economic abuse on the National Capital Region. Our study showed that 80 to 95 participants say that abuser engage in action like stealing their money off credit, spending their rent money, building up debt in their victim's name, and also threaten them if they try to go work. And 28% of women want to leave their partners during COVID-19, but were unable to, and 10% had left and returned due to financial constraints. Out of the list of service providers, participants also ranked financial institutions as the least helpful to them during COVID-19. We thank the federal government for the recent initiative in fighting gender-based violence. However, there is considerable work to be done. Our financial and legal system are not set up to support victims, and acknowledging economic abuse as a form of domestic violence is very critical. I would like to recommend the federal government to take the following action to create a meaningful change. Amend the Federal Divorce Act and the Civil Marriage Act and Criminal Code to include all forms of economic abuse, which is economic control, economic exploitation, and employment sabotage in the definition of economic violence, and remove delays in granting separation. Develop financial abuse code of conduct for financial institutions like United Kingdom. Amend the Bankruptcy Act to support economic abuse survivors. Enhance trauma-informed policy, financial code of practice, and procedures to private stakeholders such as housing, telecommunication, public transport, insurance, electric utility, credit association, bank, and other stakeholders. Provide funding to develop education materials, provide funding to increase the research capacity of organizations studying economic abuse, revise the metrics to collect economic and financial data through Statistics Canada. Once again, I would like to thank the committee members for their interest in this important topic, and most importantly, for their leadership in bringing this conversation into public hearing. I would be very happy to answer your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we're going to now move it over to Yasmin. Yasmin, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for the privilege and opportunity to be here with you today. I'm joining from London, Ontario, the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape Nations. As introduced, my name is Yasmin Hussain. I work at a small social service organization called the Muslim Resource Center for Social Support and Integration. MRC was established in 2009 to address intimate partner violence and family violence within the diversity of London's Muslim communities. We work closely with mainstream organizations, and our work spans the continuum of violence prevention, early intervention, and critical intervention in situations of risk. Our work is really focused on providing culturally informed services and programs and culturally adapting existing evidence-informed programs such as the Caring Dads program, the Strengthening Families program, and Healthy Relationships Plus programs for male and female youth that were developed at the Center for School Mental Health at Western University. I'm sort of speaking to sort of thinking about approaches to addressing gender-based violence. And our approach is one that is culturally integrative. And by that, I mean that our work of prevention and intervention considers fully the social, cultural context and experiences and intersectional vulnerabilities of individuals and communities we serve, in particular survivors. And so while there are a lot of universalities to intimate partner violence and domestic violence, there are also really clear specificities, and that we need to really pay attention to the social contexts that are varied and diverse. The factors and barriers that create vulnerability and risk for survivors are varied and diverse, as are the protective factors that exist in their lives. And so the work of prevention and responding to intimate partner violence and domestic violence really requires multiple strategies and approaches. And so I think my ask to the committee is to really continue to recognize and value the work that organizations like ourselves, but many other culturally informed and grassroots organizations do across the country in so many important ways. I think the work is really coming from a place of that's trauma informed, but also from a place that's building understanding and working with strengths. So in our work specifically, we recognize the collectivist contexts of families, the collectivist context of family structures and community structures. And we take into consideration things like pre-migration trauma, migration traumas, integration stressors, and racism and discrimination. I think all these intersectional vulnerabilities are part of the consideration in this work. And I do believe that, prevention is key, and the work of creating safety for survivors and accountability work for those who use abuse really starts and exists at the level of community through direct work with community members and working directly and actively within communities. Most individuals who experience intimate partner violence or family violence turn first to family members and friends before accessing formalized services. And so it's important that we all have the knowledge to understand intimate partner violence, to recognize it, to name it, to recognize warning signs, and to know how we can provide peer support. So how do we respond when someone discloses to us that they're being abused, or how do we recognize those warning signs? One of our work pieces really building on peer leadership. So we have a program that works with newcomer or immigrant Muslim women who are Arabic speaking. And through this 12-week curriculum, we really focus on building their knowledge on intimate partner violence, domestic abuse, to be able to name and recognize things, and equip them with capacity to provide peer support, and provide them with knowledge and skills to sort of navigate the system, to recognize resources, and to support any of their friends or loved ones who are in situations of abuse to navigate these systems as well. And so I think my call is just to recognize that the work of addressing intimate partner violence and domestic violence will take work at many levels. It will require the involvement of multiple organizations, many people, and it requires diverse strategies. I think it's thinking about how do we create safety in various ways? How do we create awareness in various ways? So the support of continued violence and violence against women agencies, sexual assault centers, shelters, work with informal institutions, academic research is important, but I think equally important is the work like building in communities, because I think that's where so much of safety starts. So thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is the first round of questions. For each party, they each get 6 minutes. So we'll be going around, and then we'll get our second round. To begin, we're going to pass the floor over to Dominique Vienne. Dominique, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hello, everyone. My first question is for Ms. Whitmore. I hope that I have pronounced your name correctly. A lot of things were said. You talked about funding for the network of shelters. I think I understood what you said correctly. You also talked about the mindset of workers in those establishments. I would like for you to come back to that, on the state of your network and the funding of your network. I think you said you're funding at the mission level, but getting funding takes time, and you're asking for more funding. And of course, when you take time trying to get funding, that's time that you're taking away from people who need support. So would you be able to tell us more on that, please?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And yes, I was talking about the challenges and issues around funding for shelters and transition houses, as well as for community-based sexual assault centers. And, I would add to that the many other grassroots organizations and networks that are providing support to survivors of gender-based violence across the country. Funding is one of those challenges that we really need to address, because we know that supporting survivors is becoming increasingly complex because there are real challenges in accessing supports in some of the other places we may think people would go to help. We're seeing that people who are accessing supports through shelters, through sexual assault centers, through organizations like the type that Yasmin was speaking about today, I'm sure, have often compounding challenges, mental health challenges. They're looking for housing support. They're trying to access income support. So often people working in these organizations are facing the sort of challenges of doing all of that kind of individual, maybe counseling support, as well as helping them navigate these really complicated systems. We know that in many ways, the work that is performed in these organizations requires really specialized training. It is often very difficult. You're working with people who have had very difficult traumatic experiences, and you are often their first point of contact. We see, though, that this work is often kind of thought as sort of just helping work or supporting work, and isn't necessarily given the same sort of recognition in terms of the type of complexity that's involved. And I mean, as we found in the study that we submitted to the committee, there's also a large network of volunteers who do this really complicated work. A lot of crisis support lines that operate across the country to provide crisis support to survivors of gender-based violence are staffed by volunteers. So what we need in terms of funding is funding that is long-term, that is flexible, that allows organizations to use funding in a way that works best for them.
Je m'excuse de vous
I apologize for interrupting you. I don't have a lot of time. How can the federal government help you more?
I think that the implementation of the National Action Plan is a really important step in addressing the disparities in funding. A lot of the funding that goes towards these organizations does come from provincial and territorial governments, so you recognize that. But there's vast inconsistencies across the country in terms of how provincial and territorial governments administer that funding. So a National Action Plan at the federal level would help do that.
Merci.
Thank you. For Ms. Elysis, I hope that I pronounced your name correctly as well. I don't think so, but I hope you'll forgive me for that. You talked about economic abuse. I feel that we don't talk enough about young women who have to deal with economic abuse. And that can take them to a dark place. Have you done any research on this? Do you have any data on this? Usually we think of an older woman in that kind of situation, but do you have any data on younger women? Because the study is also interested in relationships with younger people, teenagers.
Yeah, thank you so much. So in terms of the research, unfortunately, there is a limited data in Canada, not only for young girls, but even for all community members. So my organization right now, we are conducting a national study to identify and then see even the prevalence. And plus, we want to also explore what are the services and opportunities for victims and survivors of, economic abuse. And there is a study, actually, I already shared you in my statement, which is conducted in COVID-19 in Ottawa only, but hopefully we'll continue conducting more, but we need more resource and support. And of course, we need also some more funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn over to Anita Vanderbilt. Anita, 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our witnesses, not just for your testimony today, but also for the incredibly important work that you do. I'm going to be directing most of my questions to the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, and I'm incredibly happy to see you here, Ms. Haley Jesus. And I know that the work that you've done is incredibly, it's avant-garde. It is work that really hasn't been documented, although anecdotally, I think a lot of women understand that economic abuse and financial abuse is very much a part of the control and the abusive situation, but something that I think needs, obviously, as you've said, more research. So my question to you is, we know that it's a bit cliche, but it's he didn't hit you, did he? Or you can't actually see the abuse. That's hard enough when it comes to psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse. But when it comes to economic abuse, there are many circumstances where that might seem normalized, that, he controls the finances, or it might not seem so bad that he's grabbed the credit card to go out shopping, or, it can happen to very strong women, including women who are employed, who one would think would recognize it. But there's an issue in terms of identifying that as a form of abuse. So my question is, why is it so important that we get the data, that we have this national advocacy on economic abuse, which can be standalone as well, although, as you mentioned, almost always accompanies other forms of abuse. Why is it so important that we do this advocacy in terms of ensuring that people who are experiencing, women who are in that situation, will know that this is a form of abuse?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anita. So in terms of data, data is very important to shape public policy and also even for a women to understand, the issue. Unfortunately, one of our challenges, women by itself, they don't know about financial and economic abuse because of the nature of the complexity. And also service care providers also, they don't have a lot of resource to identify and then to tackle this kind of form of violence. So data is very essential. As I said, we are right now conducting national research. Hopefully that research will help us. But beyond that, data is also help us to develop different screening tool. So my organization right now, we are developing and adopting economic abuse screening tool for lawyers, for frontline workers, and also for service providers. I hope this is also very important in our, advocacy effort. Thank you.
Yes, and you mentioned that there might be particular groups, marginalized groups, that might be more prone to this. I'd be interested in knowing, not just in terms of perhaps newcomers or others, but also in age. Because I can certainly tell you that in many families of my parents' generation, it was very normal that the man controlled the finances. So are there particular groups that you're seeing, at least anecdotally in the research you've done so far, that are particularly vulnerable to this? And does this also impact self-reporting? Because we know, for instance, we heard that Statistics Canada said to us that racialized women are less likely to face abuse than white women. We know that is almost certainly a case of lack of self-reporting. How would that impact in terms of, like I said, some communities where it may be very normalized that women don't handle the money?
Yeah, so in terms of the vulnerability, from our experience and from our day-to-day work, Black Indigenous women are highly impacted, specifically Indigenous women, those who have age above 15, that's what we have seen. Unfortunately, our pension law and our pension system, even it doesn't help them. And as you know, your income support is not sometimes is considered as income, especially if you have a spousal support, and that's also affected women in many ways. So in terms of, the other aspect, you mentioned, definitely it's very intersectional. It affects everyone regardless of your socioeconomic status, education status, and race and gender. Definitely we need to work and continue moving forward, and hopefully we'll come up also some best practices. And I want to also adopt from many other countries. Thank you.
And you mentioned, of course, that economic abuse makes it very hard for the person to leave the relationship. But you said something briefly about that it continues long after. And for instance, other forms of abuse, physical violence, can often end when the person starts their new life. But economic abuse, the credit ratings, high debt loads, those sorts of things can carry much longer for women. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, exactly. So the nature of this form of abuse, it continues after separation. It doesn't rely on physical proximity. So the more they leave women that abusive situation, perpetuators deliberately hold and control economic resource. So economic resource including credit, it may be debt, it may be asset, it may be any kind of property under both of them. Unfortunately, there is a lack of system that supports survivors in between. So that traps them, and then survivors also, they start to struggle to rebuild their life. So as you know, even to get an apartment, simply every landlord, they want to check your credit history. Most survivors, they are not eligible to get an apartment. If you want to access also legal services, unfortunately, some of them, they are not eligible because of the joint asset. Even to freeze your asset, you need to hire a lawyer. That's the system out there. In order to go back to school, definitely you need to have a good credit history, including like OSAP. That's what we have seen. Unfortunately, survivors, they are not able to go back to school. So they are not able to access housing, justice system, including housing and basic need. You can imagine also the mental health, how it's layered. So when you see the continuum, this kind of violence, it stays for a woman for more than 25 years. That's the statistics, and that's also the research we found, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to move it over for the next 6 minutes to Adrienne Laroche. Adrienne, you have 6.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses again for their presentations. Thank you for taking the time to be here. My first question is for Ms. Haliesus for the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. One of the mandates of your organization, and I quote, is to defend the recognition of economic abuse in Canada, but also of coercive control, and to raise awareness with regards to economic abuse in the context of family violence. Could you tell us more on what you propose to the federal government with regards to coercive control, which is one of the main issues of this study?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this important question. So we expect from federal government to amend the Divorce Act. That's our advocacy. We collected, of course, in a petition last time for the House. Unfortunately, because of the federal election, we are not successful. So the Divorce Act has to be, include the 3 forms of abuse, which is economic control, economic exploitation, and employment sabotage has to be clearly articulated. And also we expect from, just as the justice system as well, we need to have, policy and practices that really help us a nonprofit organization and support services so that they can address, easily and support women. So this is our advocacy. So far, close to 27 cities across Canada, they proclaim November 26 as Economic Abuse Awareness Day. Even this year, we had also international campaign to raise awareness. So raising awareness not only for survivors, including for policymakers, researchers, and also any advocate, on this field. So we'll continue advocating, in collaboration with our national task force and also many stakeholders. So this is our advocacy first. So moving forward, right now we are advocating for financial institutions to develop a financial code of practice to protect survivors. We have a voluntary code of practices for elder financial abuse. So we want to replicate that advocacy and that code of conduct to protect, financial and economic abuse. So it's an ongoing process. So definitely need the support from the federal government moving forward. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Mais...
Thank you. You also talked about economic crime, but with criminal justice, would it not be better to have a clearer definition, because there isn't a clear definition of coercive control in the criminal code? Could that prevent future violence and femicides? And I also have a question for Ms. Whitmore, who talked about specialized support in Quebec, we have a study on special tribunals, which would be done through the Quebec government. But to do so, there needs to be changes to the criminal code. And there's the same thing with the e-bracelets. Changes need to be made to the criminal code. If Ms. Whitmore, if you could add to that, or Ms. Hilicius, or if Ms. Hussein has something to add, please do.
Yeah, probably I can answer the first question. So definitely, yeah, if we could make it like coercive control as offense, definitely it really helps for a women, because economic abuse is a behavior which is in line with coercive behavior, coercive control. So I think that's very helpful. So we'll continue also advocating. Maybe I'll leave the second question for Erin. I'm not a lawyer, but this is my observation, and that's my opinion. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. I think that some of these initiatives related to making changes in the criminal code and implementing various legislation are potentially important tools that can provide supports to some survivors. Certainly, we're looking forward to seeing some of the work that's taking place in Quebec around the specialized sexual violence courts. I think, though, when we're talking about criminal justice reforms, we really do have to also make sure that any type of legislative change is informed by input from survivors and anti-violence workers, that it is also accompanied by resourcing that will allow for the training that will be necessary for law enforcement officials and the actors in the criminal justice system to make sure that these initiatives can actually be implemented in a meaningful way. And I'll just make one final point to say that we also have to remember that the vast majority of survivors do not access the criminal justice system. It is really not seen as a safe place, particularly for Indigenous, Black, racialized survivors. And so our efforts, need to go beyond just criminal justice reforms.
You have 45 seconds for the next question and answer.
Madame Hussein, si vous avez quelque chose.
Ms. Hussein, if you have anything to add, you can, but also, whether it be creating specialized tribunals or e-bracelets, have you examined best practices in any other countries that we could look to? Do you have any examples, any models from other countries?
Can I go ahead? Maybe.
I believe that was okay. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, yeah. So we did actually different, assessment in many countries. So we adopted those best practices also in Canada. So what we have seen, for example, in Australia, there is a financial code of practice among their, in their financial institution. And plus in UK recently, they also developed a financial code of practices to protect survivors. So this code of practice, it really helps financial institutions to educate and to put policy and practices in place to protect survivors.
Awesome.
And also we have seen,
yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off so that we can continue. I'm going to move it on now to Leah Gazan. Leah, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the witnesses for being here today with your excellent testimony. My first question is for Madame Whitford. Your organization released a report called the National Action Community Engagement Initiative Summary of Findings. And one of the things that you spoke about is the need to decriminalize sex work and support sex workers' labor movements. Could you please share a little bit about why you made that recommendation and how this would support addressing intimate partner violence and violence against women?
Yeah, and I think that is a really complex issue that continues to need further research. I know that there is another committee that is currently conducting sessions on that issue. But one of the things that we know also when we're talking about issues related to sex work is the need to make sure that recommendations are informed by people who are working in that industry and those who are supporting them. We want to make sure that, and from what we have heard from people who are sort of on the ground doing that work, is that current legislation does not necessarily work to prevent violence and risk for those doing that work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I also know that she recommended a guaranteed livable basic income, which I was really happy to see. Moving to Madame Halesus, is that right? Halesus?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. You know, you talked about economic abuse. We know, and I've asked this question in other committees, the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, Article 4.5, directly calls for the implementation of a guaranteed livable basic income for all Canadians as a way to mitigate this crisis of violence. Would you agree that a guaranteed livable basic income would assist women and diverse gendered individuals to escape violence or not be as susceptible to economic abuse?
Yes, yeah. One of the reasons for economic abuse is their living condition. Definitely, if we could have the infrastructure and support for a woman, that's also very important. Yeah.
Yes, and has your organization endorsed the need for a guaranteed livable basic income?
Okay, right now our national task force actually on 2022, our plan is to revise a universal benefit, income. So we'll come up with some policy recommendation. Maybe we can pass for the House, anytime soon.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. I have another question for Madame Hussein. You spoke about the need for community initiatives that are culturally informed and trauma informed, and bringing individuals together with like experiences as critical in addressing intimate partner violence. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think, survivors, there's such diverse experiences around gender-based violence, and survivors have such unique experiences. And the communities we work with, I think already, if you're experiencing isolation from within your community, within sort of the social context of wider Canadian society, or from services, I think having a space that sort of builds a safe space as a first foundation where their experiences are recognized and named, which oftentimes also doesn't even happen within the communities they exist in, where I think sometimes forms of violence, we all exist within norms, every community, cultural community does. But it's recognizing the specificity of those norms. And so norms might look different, norms that sort of minimize violence or reinforce violence, that victim blame, all of that exists across communities and across cultures, but it looks different in communities and cultures. And so I think bringing together spaces where there's a shared experience or recognition of how norms that reinforce control and abuse exist and happen, I think is a powerful starting point to being able to name experiences and to challenge or disrupt those experiences. And I think also in terms of the experience of recognizing that people come with experiences moving to Canada or integration stressors, those are unique stressors that immigrants or newcomers face. And I think having those validated in spaces where people recognize shared experiences is really important, because sometimes it's easy to minimize, even for survivors or victims themselves, some of the isolation or the harm or the marginalization their experience within systems, because it's not named or validated elsewhere. So I think, to me, that's an important starting point for empowerment.
So 30
how
seconds.
Do you think those, sorry, do these barriers differ for specific groups? You spoke about immigrant women, refugee women, women with a disability.
Indeed, absolutely. And I think even within newcomer communities, so even within, like, we work within the diversity of the Muslim community, but the Muslim community is not homogenous. So Syrian women may have very different barriers than Afghan women, or than women who or folks that identify as LGBTQ will have different barriers. And so I think we always have to be very careful about, I think there's shared experiences, but then even within groups, there's very unique experiences. And so we always have to make space for those unique experiences and look for where the most vulnerable or where they're most marginalized, even within kind of collective community identities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to switch it to our second round, but due to time limitations, I like to take time away from people. So we're going to do 4 minutes for CPC and LPC, and then we're down to 2 minutes for the NDPM block. So I would like to welcome Shelby Cramp to our committee. And Shelby, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's delightful being here. I think we can all recognize that this is a complex and raw and very emotional issue for many people. I'd like to start by thanking our witnesses for being present. We around the table today, we all have a voice, and our role is to advocate and to make relevant legislation. My alarming concern is that there's so many young men and women in my riding of HLNA and people across the country that feel that they don't have that voice. Abuse, as we all know, comes in many forms. It's sexual and physical, emotional, financial. But Ms. Whitmore actually said it earlier. She mentioned about we're great at gathering recommendations, and it's key, but it's more essential that we move swiftly to actually implement recommendations that are on the table. So I think that really needs to be a focus. My question is, how do we break the barriers for young men and women that are embarrassed to speak up? Because most of our teenagers are, I have 2 daughters myself, they're on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. Is that a platform, for example, that some people, that there's messages that are going out to communicate with these young adults?
Who would you like to take the question?
Anyone can answer that one. I'll address the next question more specifically.
Sure. Well, I can try that question. I think that that's so important to break, like as you're saying, to break barriers about speaking out and to let people know that it is safe to speak out. In order to do that, we have to make sure that there are the supports available so that they can actually get them when they do take the courageous step of speaking out. Part of what needs to be done is addressing some of the stigma that young people can feel when they talk about being sexually abused or assaulted or experiencing other forms of violence. So that comes back to doing that early prevention work from early on, which isn't just about talking about sort of violence, but also the harmful beliefs and norms and gender stereotypes that sort of play into violence.
Excellent, thank you. And my next 2 questions, first of all, Clare's Law. I'm not sure how many of you, I'm hoping that you're all familiar with it. It's the right to know, the right to ask. It's already enforced in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Are you familiar with this? It's based out of the UK, and do you think that this would be a solution that we could entertain? And my second question, more specifically addressed to Madame Halayezus, is with regards to my former career as a financial advisor and being 12 years in the financial field. You mentioned with regards to elder financial abuse and how it's being helped by financial institutions. How can we translate that action that's already happened? And then is it consistent or similar that we could use for that of young adults?
40 seconds to respond.
I mean, I can briefly jump in about Clare's Law just to say that, yes, we are familiar with Clare's Law. And I think I would sort of just echo the point that I made earlier around Clare's Law as being one tool that may provide support for some survivors. But, for it to be effective, it really needs to have resourcing available for training that would need to happen, as well as enough resources for people who are experiencing violence to access legal support if necessary. I think we really want to be careful that something like Clare's Law doesn't put additional onus on victims in any way for leaving situations. So I'll just
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to turn it over now to Jenna Suds. Jenna, you have 4 minutes.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of the witnesses who have joined us today. It's such important work. My first question, I'm going to go to Yasmin. You spoke a bit about, the importance of culturally informed programs. And I think we all recognize, and we've spoke about at this committee, the barriers that can be in place for people from different religious or cultural backgrounds as they're facing domestic violence, and that the fact that reporting could be different, the definition could be different. And then also we've talked about this, the fact that, sometimes there's kind of this underground network of support that exists for people in different communities. And I'm wondering if you can speak to either to that specifically, and how we can kind of harness, those supports in a bigger way to help victims.
Thank you so much for that question. I think that's really important, sort of recognizing sort of the underground or informal supports that exist. And I think a lot of our work is building the capacity for what is considered informal support, but is often very crucial support, because it's a first step maybe to accessing then more formalized supports, or making decisions for survivors to make choices around the formalized supports they want to access. And I think that begins with, recognizing, working with communities around this issue. And so I think that engages community members. It also engages in faith communities, faith leaders, recognizing that people have a responsibility and role to play that is proactive, and providing them with the knowledge and tools, or equipping them with the ability to play that role. So I think, and I think in our work too, what I see is a lot of it is challenging norms and building the capacity for community support, because a lot of times too, that underground or informal support, it's important and exists, but they may feel like they're in the minority. So how do you shift that so that becomes the majority within a community, and where that voice becomes a dominant voice, and is one that sort of informs or creates that space for survivors to know that we have a caring community, and these are the values that we uphold and in addressing. And so I think that's what a lot of our work, I think those values are there. I think it's just amplifying those values and making space for those values and giving them sort of the support they need. Yeah.
Fabulous. So I appreciate that. And quickly, I'll go to Erin. Of course, as you know, we're working on the National Action Plan for Gender-Based Violence currently, and you made a few recommendations, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit. You mentioned, the distinct needs of sexual violence survivors. Can you articulate for me what it is that you'd like to see with respect to sexual violence for survivors?
45 seconds.
Sure, thank you. I think that part of it is ensuring that community-based sexual assault centers that specialize in providing support to survivors do have the flexible core funding that they need to provide those services. We also need to continue to address issues within the criminal justice system and its handling specifically of sexual assault investigations, as well as supporting alternative options for justice around transformative justice that we're starting to see as offering some important work in that area. I do think, though, that work should happen within the National Action Plan, because the National Action Plan is about addressing the root causes: housing, poverty, economic insecurity, food insecurity, all of those things that we need to really tackle in order to address gender-based violence in a really meaningful way.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move over. So, Andrian, you have 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Whitmore, for talking about the National Action Plan. And I would like to come back to it for conclusions. Ms. Whitmore, do you have anything to add regarding that action plan with regards to what could be done to accelerate its implementation? Because right now we're talking about 10 years to implement the plan, and what should be a part of that plan. And I would also like to invite the other 2 witnesses in 30 seconds to say concluding remarks. What would you like to see in the plan, and what could be done to accelerate its implementation?
Would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay, Erin, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the National Action Plan, the reason, the need for it to be a 10-year National Action Plan is because, again, it is about addressing the systemic barriers and making structural change, which takes a long time. We need to see the ongoing momentum of this work over a number of years and potentially over a number of different governments. I think that the National Action Plan work needs to be guided by the sector, by anti-violence advocates. We also really need to make sure that it is done is harmonized with the work that's being done around the National Action Plan for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and that work happens simultaneously.
30 seconds left.
I would agree with everything that Erin Whitmore has said. And I think in terms of sometimes I think we delay starting points until we have a proper plan. And I think there's opportunity to start in the immediate. And I think knowing that the plan will build and grow over time, but I think we know enough now. We know that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. We have people, we have momentum, we have enough information to start. And I think it's building the opportunities to flow funding, I think in ways that are long-term and flexible, that meet existing organizations, but also fund new organizations or grassroots initiatives as well. And that include people in this conversation ongoing. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're now going to turn it over for our final 2 minutes to Leah Gazan. Leah, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I really appreciate the commentary about recognizing and honoring housing as a human right, ensuring food sustainability and proper income is the best way to mitigate the crisis against violence against women, girls, and diverse genders. My question is for Madame Helius. Your organization, in terms of policy recommendations, spoke about the resources and funding that's needed for shelters, specifically shelters for newcomers and religious centers to provide accessible information on economic abuse. Can you identify the gap and what it should actually look like if we're providing proper resources?
Yeah, thank you so much. So one of the gap right now is there is no any education material that speaks about like economic and financial abuse. That's also, it's a huge gap, not only for survivors and frontline workers. As I mentioned, there are also experts out there. Understanding the nature of economic abuse is a little bit challenging because of these issues. So in terms of the resource, yes, we need to allocate resource to develop a trauma-informed, cultural sensitive education materials, screening tools, and also any kind of conversation toolkit as well on how we could talk to, survivors of economic abuse, because their issue is very complex. And the other things, what we need is we need to have a national toll-free line, just a phone, so that women, she can access any financial counseling from trauma perspective, because we have seen this experience from many other countries. We know we have a national toll-free line for survivors and victims of elder financial abuse, but we need to adopt for gender-based violence and domestic violence abuse. So these are very critical, and also we are developing right now mobile app for a woman to flag and identify economic and financial abuse. That's also another resource, but this is a small scale. But at the nationwide, definitely those resources very, very essential, because it's a huge gap in Canada.
Well, thank you so. Oh, go ahead, Leah. Sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been a fantastic. We'll get it right sooner or later, Leah. We'll be fine. Anyway, this has been a fantastic panel. Thank you so much to Erin and Meseret and Yasmin. Thank you so much for offering your expertise. We're going to suspend for about a minute and welcome our new panel. So on behalf of FEWO, we'd like to thank all of you for coming, and we will be switching over, suspending for 1 minute. so much to the panelists for joining here for our second panel. I'd like to invite you to our study on intimate partner violence. And we are going to welcome our second panel from the Boys and Girls Club. We have Peel. We have Michael Jason, Giove, you're going to have to correct that for me, I'm sure. Oh, there's one more witness. I guess we're really not starting. They're coming?
Yeah, they're coming.
Okay. Well, just hold for one moment, and I'll really welcome you back very shortly. Reconvene this time. This is fantastic. But I'd like to welcome from the Boys and Girls Club, Michael Jason Giove, and help me say that after if you don't mind. He is the Executive Director. From the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Kimberly Greenwood, the Co-Chair of Victims of Crime Committee, and Frances Lenouette, who is the Co-Chair of the Crime Prevention, Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee. And from Changing Ways Incorporated, Tim Kelly, who is the Executive Director. You will all be provided 5 minutes for opening statements. So we're going to start off with the Boys and Girls Club. So Michael, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chairs, and members. Thank you for inviting me on behalf of my organization, BGC Peel, from the Boys and Girls Club, and a federation partner with BGC Canada, to present a local grassroots look at the intimate partners in domestic violence across, in our case, City of Brampton and Region of Peel, especially those in the marginalized and vulnerable communities that we serve. As mentioned at the beginning, my name is Michael Giove. I'm the Executive Director with the club. BGCPO believes that through our 40 years of service and on-ground experience with families, our mission provide a safe, supportive place where children, youth, and families can experience new opportunities, overcoming barriers, and build positive relationships can be used as a foundation for solutions towards changing how communities, children, youth, and families deal with and aim to resolve domestic issues and potential become violent. BGCPO's mandate is centered on prevention. The common trend that our staff and volunteers are hearing is that we need more useful, credible, and impactful education, information, and awareness around how to identify domestic violence, how to report it and who to report it to, how to protect each other, especially our children, from it, and ultimately a long-term plan to prevent it from happening in the first place. Facilitating the development and enhancement of community programs that aim at prevention and support while providing services for children and youth to support their development as individuals within the context of the family environment is a recommendation that BGCPO urges the federal government to consider. We know that we all should be doing better. Through the work that we do, we know that it's communication with each other, with our children, youth, and families in our communities that will make those strides. The teaching of prevention must be done at an early age. We look towards the future, our next generation, and helping them with the perspective that they have on what it means to be kind, while working with those in authority can and should be seen as positive, not as interference. And most important, raising our children to value and understand the world that we live in and what it demands of us in order to survive and thrive, equality, inclusion, and acceptance of diversity. Despite all of that, sometimes it's not enough. Families are telling my staff and our volunteers that they're ashamed and afraid at times to bring matters forward. And despite wanting to, fight the urge to share the information of all forms of violence that impact their lives. Be it the lack of confidence in the systems that manage these situations, when Canadians fear those who can protect them, for those that can threaten them, we have a major issue that needs to be resolved. In the Region of Peel, over 85% of those who report violence are women. Stats that my staff found show that 43% of these women are 15 to 19-year-olds that have experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetime. That number drops to 24% for your 20 to 24-year-olds and 10% for 25 and up. That means that 15 to 24-year-olds, the bulk of girls and young women that BGC Peel and BGC Canada support, that means 67% of these young ladies have experienced intimate violence or domestic violence at some level. In again, to the regional FEWO regional police, we found that 74% of their domestic calls had seen an increase over the last 5 years. One of the main impacts that we hear from our staff is the fallout regarding parental alienation and parents' willingness to fight for their children's rights and access to them. In a conversation with Chef Vanessa Brown, the founder of Against Parental Alienation Canada, she brought to my attention that at the current time, there are no federal or provincial laws that truly regulate parental alienation and the domestic violence that comes from it. We obviously understand that courts recognize it, but we do believe that through reviews and revision of the criminal code, there could be opportunities to change the wording to protect those that are victims and survivors of parental alienation. And part of that is when we reviewed the final report through the ad hoc federal, provincial, and territorial working group reviewing spousal abuse policies and legislation, we didn't notice that there was strong enough wording that would see those kind of protections. So we would definitely love if the federal government could go back and have a review and see how the impacts directly and indirectly are hurting and impacting our children, not only in the time of situation, but as they grow into becoming adults and hopefully parents themselves. So in conclusion, BGCPO is requesting that the Standing Committee of the Status of Women's in a review to see what kind of positive impacts organizations like BGCPO through BGC Canada can offer intimate partners and their families dealing with domestic violence. You know, it's through local partnerships with medical professionals, our law enforcement, psychologists, to assist with the helping of treating the core symptoms before it gets out of hand. But we truly believe that education, awareness, and community engagement would play a critical role in the de-escalation of domestic violence and repeat offenses. So let's work together to ensure that we're providing safe places and safe opportunities for our children, youth, and families as we progress forward and hopefully bring an end to domestic violence at the local levels and throughout Canada. And it's building on that foundation through positive actions and solutions on how we can change and help these children at an early age break the trends that we're seeing so many times through families. At Boys and BGCPO, we do believe that opportunity changes everything, and that barriers are no more barriers is a starting point, not an end goal. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn over to the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. So Kimberly or Francis, I'm not sure who's taking up the 5 minutes, but I'm going to turn the floor over to you for 5.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address this committee on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. As you're aware, I'm Chief Kimberly Greenwood and the co-chair of the Victims of Crime Committee. As police officers, we see firsthand the tragic and sometimes deadly effects that intimate partner violence brings to victims, their families, and our communities. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated concerns and stresses the need for consistent national approaches to address intimate partner violence. Women's shelters are reporting not only an increase in cases, but also an increase in the intensity of the violence and the levels of fear experienced by victims. Shelters are also noting a spike in substance abuse as feelings of helplessness rise. The many complexities of intimate partner violence and the need for a coordinated understanding of and response to it in Canada is paramount. In 2016, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, in partnership with the University of New Brunswick, released an evidence-based and research-driven national framework on collaborative police action on intimate partner violence. The framework is intended to provide police services across the nation with shared language and understanding of intimate partner violence. The key themes include consistent police response and investigative practices that are victim-focused and trauma-informed in nature. The adoption of common tools and techniques for police intervention, including standardized risk assessments. Sharing responsibilities across agencies, including our public health, police, social agencies, and other community organizations. We need an effective court processes and case management to address risks and prevent further harm. More research and adapted proven evidence-based practices with monitoring and supporting of offenders, like the research being conducted in Barrie on recidivism rates of intimate partner violence offenders. And finally, the creation of a Canadian Centre for Policing Intimate Partner Violence to bring the framework online and make it operational for our frontline officers and investigators. Our work did not stop since the framework was launched. We are taking steps to produce additional resources on trauma-informed and victim-focused approaches, as well as educational material on coercive control. I now turn over the presentation to Director Francis Lanouette. He is the co-chair of the Crime Prevention and Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. As police officers, we know that by the time a domestic violence charge goes to court, it's likely that the victim has been experiencing some form of violence or controlling behaviors at the hands of their partner for a significant amount of time. Recently, our association has expanded its focus on domestic violence to address the issue of coercive control. Our committee is collaborating on research to better understand this phenomenon from a police perspective and to develop the tools necessary to detect it. To improve the understanding of this concept by the policing community, the association offered a webinar on this topic. Our association also proposes other avenues of intervention to achieve continued progress to help victims sooner before physical or visible harm comes to them. First, we must address current limitations in the criminal code when it comes to intervening in cases of domestic violence. As a result, we support legislative changes, including the addition of coercive control as a new offense under the Criminal Code, as suggested in our CACP submission on Bill C-247, which is now known as Bill C-202. We also support adopting Intimate Partner Violence Disclosure Acts, Clare's Law, throughout all provinces and territories in Canada. In addition to legislative changes, we are also calling for the development of a Canadian Intimate Partner Violence Policing Centre, as previously mentioned by Chief Greenwood, the implementation of courts specialized in these matters to better equip, support victims throughout the judicial process, continued education and awareness initiatives with the general population and especially with youth, and the development of multi-sectoral teams whose mandate is to assess the risk of homicide in cases of intimate partner violence. On this last point, it should be noted that in Quebec, such rapid response teams are already being deployed, and a new law on electronic bracelet systems has been adopted. The Quebec experience could perhaps be expanded across the country. In conclusion, we must provide officers with tools to help them recognize and address intimate partner violence, including coercive control, because when victims stay quiet because they do not believe there is anything police can do, they also lose out on the opportunity to access support agencies, resources, and opportunities to change their situation. Thank you.
And finally, we're going to turn it over to Tim Kelly, who is from the Changing Ways Incorporation. Tim, you have the floor for 5.
Hi, thanks. Really an honor to be here to be speaking to this committee. I'm coming to you from St. Thomas, Ontario, and I'm here to represent my agency, which is Changing Ways. And the work that we do both in Ontario, locally and provincially. So Changing Ways is a social service agency that specifically focuses on people who cause harm in their intimate relationships. And while we do focus and do some work with women who have been caught up in the criminal justice system because of offenses, the primary focus that we work on is with men causing harm in their relationships, as well as men who are exposing their children to abuse and causing harm. My office is located, our head office is in London, but we have offices in St. Thomas and Chatham. So we are a southwestern Ontario service provider. I just saw Ms. Vecchio's face when I said that. And yeah, this is where we are. So happy to be here. I'm also, in addition to that job, which is an awful lot to do, I'm also a service manager at the Children's Aid Society in Oxford County, and I manage a specialized embedded service that works with people who have experienced harm in their intimate relationships, both survivors, children, and men who cause harm, in addition to supports for women who are using violence as well. So that's me. That's what I'm coming here to talk to you about. I'm not going to repeat everything that everyone said. Couldn't do it anyways. But what I am going to talk about is one of the things when I looked at who was on the list of speakers here, I was excited to be here, and also I have to say my heart sunk a little bit because the association of working with men who cause harm or people who cause harm and the criminal justice system is one of the issues and one of the problems that we're dealing with in trying to address this issue earlier on. And the reason I want to bring that forward is we've been working. So I've been the director of Changing Ways for 23 years. I've worked there for over 30 years, and trying to actually look at moving the intervention to prevention further upstream has been a constant problem for us to look at, because right now, for most places in Ontario and across the province, the threshold to actually access services for men who are causing harm is a criminal offense. And so the implication for that is that there's nothing happening prior to the police involvement. From my perspective, police are an amazing service. They're a last resort that we need to be doing. And so what I want to throw out to this group is start considering, what would prevention look like? What would a national strategy on prevention look like? And without taking up a whole lot of time, I've just sat in awe over the last 2 years on what a national strategy to prevent a virus could look like. And when I think about the intentionality of that work, the intentionality of a federal government engaging and working with provincial governments to actually take on an incredibly invasive issue, I don't see intimate partner violence as any different than that. So what I would implore the federal government to think about doing in terms of a strategy as well, I think looking at criminal justice as a response, it can't be the only response that we have here. And so looking at ways in which we can engage broadly across the country, provincially, municipalities, locally, all of those things and have a focused look at what we're doing here. The healthcare system does an amazing job at thinking about prevention. And again, the way it attacked this COVID pandemic we had is a really good example of how, if we actually pull ourselves together, think about this, and then look for local efforts to end violence against women and intimate partner violence, I think we can get there. I'll surrender the floor.
Well, thank you very much. And Tim, I'm just Karen. That's what everybody will find out. I'm just Karen here because that's the way I like to do it at FEWO. So thank you so much. What we'll be doing around is we'll be going around on our first round of questions. It'll be 6 minutes per party, and then we'll come around to the second round. So we're going to begin today's questions with Michelle Ferrari. Michelle, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I need about 6 hours. What a group of witnesses, and I can't stress enough how interesting what you just said, Tim. When we look at Mr. Bon Jovi, I just want to call you Mr. Bon Jovi. I've been singing that since you said that, Michael. You know, you're the prevention end of it. Your police chiefs here are the intervention of when something has happened. And then we have you, Tim, who has to come in and try to do the restorative. So it's a very interesting group of witnesses that we have here. My real passion is to speak to what Tim was saying, and it's really on the prevention and earlier intervention end of things. And for a lot of people, we know we have an opioid crisis, and I think there's a real tie in here because all people, women who are victims of domestic violence, don't always end up in a shelter. They have to treat that pain and abuse in different ways and maladaptive coping mechanisms. And so I think it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge that the opioid crisis and a lot of things that are happening on the street is not connected to this committee. So I think that's something to take into consideration. So I want to start with you, Michael, because I think children who are in a product or in an environment that is being programmed, for lack of better term, you can do all of the things you want to do at Boys and Girls Club, which is phenomenal work of telling kids what a healthy relationship is. But if they're just going home and seeing something different from the core people in their lives, that's a very big uphill battle. So I want to ask a couple questions around tools that you could be using, or if you are using. Number one, I'm curious about what you do in terms of social media training with the kids you have coming into your Boys and Girls Club.
Well, yeah, thank you for that question. And I agree. It is, it's all about communicating with them at an early stage. And I will get to your question on the social media, but it's very important that we acknowledge them and identify to them that they have support here for everything that they're looking for. You know, their situations that they find themselves in, they didn't put themselves in those situations. So it's important for us for them to know their value and their understanding. Regarding social media, we make it very much a high value to anyone who is trained with us, from staff, volunteers. They receive social media training. That's the safeguards, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. But more importantly, we sit down with each individual child, be it in the last 2 years through virtual, and explain to them the safeguards. We've been able to partner with a couple organizations, Actua, who's done some fantastic training for us regarding cyberbullying, cyber interference, and it's I'll get back to my over messaging. It's about how we communicate to the children and youth on the level in which they can understand it. We can go in, we can throw a bunch of terms at them, we can talk to them like we're talking now. But you have to understand, you have to get down to their level of what it means to them for the situation. So what does it mean when they're on, a child under 13 shouldn't be on social media in the first place, in my opinion.
Here.
My opinion should be under 16, but there needs to be honest, there needs to be more federal safeguards protecting them, because at the end of the day, to Tim's point, I love the work that our Peel police do, but if it's getting to that point, then we've already lost control of the situation.
Thank you. And I hate rushing everybody, but I have so much I want to get to. So I hope that there was a documented thing of federal safeguards for children in social media. I hope that makes it into a committee report. I want to talk a little bit about building trust, because I think that's the essence of all of the things here. And it's interesting because before I heard you talk, Tim, I didn't actually know as much as you explained, which was great, lived experience. So men who've actually come out on the other side and are now trying to restore themselves. Are you working, or would you suggest working with police and Young Boys and Girls Club, because they've been on the other side? They know those telltale signs. They can talk to police in terms of negotiating all of these things for restorative justice, the lived experience aspect, to build the trust with these domestic violence cases that sometimes women just do not want to report.
Absolutely. And it's certainly one of the things that we, as an organization, and I know that many of the men's programs across Ontario, because those are the ones I know the best, do have relationships with local police departments or provincial police departments and other services that are there in our communities. The other place that I think is really key for us to be thinking about is connecting with child welfare, and how the families that we're talking about, how the types of behaviors that we're looking at show up in child welfare much earlier than they'll show up in a police report, or in fact, when police will go out on a call and there isn't necessarily evidence of a charge to be laid, they will make a referral to child welfare and move that investigation over there. So I think there's lots of opportunities both to be working within our communities, working within our broader provincial and federal communities, to really begin to look at what are those intersectional points in which these families and which these men come into our systems. And what we know from our own research that we've done over the years is they show up in general practice offices with their doctors. They show up in child welfare situations. They show up in all kinds of places. And so it's working within those communities of service providers to actually grab these guys and begin to do that work with them. And I think that work is absolutely informed by men who've gone through this process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
much. Am I out of time?
You are. You've got 4 seconds. So yeah. But thank you so much. We're going to now move it over to Sonia Sidhu. Sonia, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses. My first questions to Boys and Girls Club. Thank you, Mr. Jory. I want to say thank you, Boys and Girls Club Peel, for their 40th anniversary. And thank you all the work they are doing in the community, giving a safe space to Brampton youth. In this committee, we have heard the young people are experiencing violence at alarming rates. For some youth, relationship can turn abusive. You mentioned that teens were the largest group in there. How can we provide teens, parents, and educators with the resources to recognize and prevent teen dating violence?
One of the biggest things I think that we can, thank you, Sonia, for that question. One of the biggest things that we need to do is we need to start listening to our youth about what it is that they want, providing them with an opportunity to have their voice heard through BGC, not only just BGC PEWO, but through Canada. We provide opportunities for peer-to-peer development, peer-to-peer mentoring and training, so that they have a comfortable outlet in which to go and talk to. Within our, your local community, there needs to be, and I know we talked all about this through COVID, there needs to be true collaboration with the end result of serving these youth who need the guidance. Many youth, I have 2 teenagers myself, are very awkward. So being able to provide them with opportunities to speak to their peers or speak to individuals who have been in situations that they've been in is something that needs to be made available to them. So through the federal government, if there's opportunities to download more additional funding towards community engagement for organizations, be it whoever it is, BGC or through others, we need to provide those safe and easy accessible places for our youth to go.
We know that children who grew up in homes with violence are more likely to form relationship like that themselves later in life, either as the victim or the abuser. Can you tell us that intervention you use to coach children from avoiding this pattern and breaking the cycle of abuse? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So to earlier point, it's prevention. We need, and it's not just through organizations like BGC. It needs to start within our school boards. It needs to start within our overall community engagement. How we speak to the children about their value and what it is that they bring to society. Talk to the kids about their passions. Talk to the kids about within the certain context of what it is that's happening in their life. Making accessible the professionals who actually know how to handle these situations, but more importantly, know how to engage with the youth. It comes down to the way that we communicate. So as Sonia, as you know, living in Brampton Region of Peel, we're one of the top diverse communities across Canada. So the ability to access interpreters, access to resources that are newcomers in BGC. We have 75% of our members are newcomers within the last 5 years, where they have a go-to place where they can get these resources without feeling afraid, without feeling ashamed, just so they can get a better understanding of what it means to be Canadian. And I think sometimes that's something we forget, that a lot of our new immigrants, they come from countries where not that domestic violence is accepted, but it's unfortunately the norm. So when they come to Canada, we want to make sure that they feel as safe and as comfortable as they can. And it takes all levels of government. In Peel's case, it takes all 4 levels of government to make sure that these resources are accessibly available at no cost, because there should be no cost on someone's safety.
Madam Chair, my next question is to a representative from the Canadian Association of Chief of Police. I just want to ask them, the cybercrime and online bullying is on the rise. Criminals are targeting especially girls, teens online, and we need new tools against these new challenges. In your opinion, do you think cyber security training, or what kind of the safeguards are some of the solutions you are recommending?
Deputy Kimberly.
Thank you very much. When we look at cybercrime, we do have, through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, a group that focuses in on cybercrime. And we know and have seen that children and youth are victimized through the use of cybercrime. The tools that we are recommending, all of our initiatives that we're involved in, it starts with awareness and education to those impacted, to the police officers that are involved in with the youth. We look at an engagement with the parents, those agencies that work with youth and children, from our education system to our social agencies. And then the last part is the enforcement involved in these cases. So it's a multi-pronged approach to looking at cybercrime as it relates to intimate relationships between children and youth.
30 seconds left, Sonia.
So do you think cybersecurity training is going to be helpful?
The training for youth and police, every tool that makes our community safer and focuses on prevention, intervention, and then reducing victimization, we're all supportive of those type of initiatives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're now going to move it over to Adrian. Adrian, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses of this second panel who have shared different points of views with us. Thank you, Mr. Jovi, Monsieur Lanouette, Mr. Kelly, and Miss Greenwood. I would like to start with the criminalization of coercive control and the training of police officers and judges. During the first round of witnesses, we talked about this and the importance of working on coercive control, to see measures as tools that can be used to counter the issue of coercive control. I would like to hear from the representatives of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. Would it be necessary to extend to coercive control throughout the legal process? And do you need more tools to better support victims? You talked about what's happening in Quebec with special courts and e-bracelets. Should we examine more closely what's happening in Quebec to improve support for victims? Answer. For about a year and a half, the association has been doing a study on coercive control. We examined the UK, Scotland, and England, and they mentioned training all of the actors, so not only police officers, but also the lawyers and judges. So we have something that is in development in Quebec that's similar to that. It's essential. And we also want to focus on community organizations. All organizations, basically, that work with victims of domestic violence need to understand what coercive control truly is. And our research also has to do with developing tools for the public and for police officers so that they can indicate elements of coercive control in the evidence. And to do that, you need to change the criminal code. You can't just change a section without adding an aspect of training.
Oui, vous avez parlé de...
You talked about training. You also talked about Bill C-202, and that this bill could help accompany what is being done in Quebec, correct? Answer. Yes, in Quebec and in Canada. Currently, coercive control is increasingly present in the assessment tools for officers. But for community organizations, this is something that we weren't talking about as much in Canada, which is now more up to date. And we are realizing that, and we talk about the Scottish model, for example, they chose to have domestic violence as an offense, and there is also an offense for coercive control. Another issue is the recidivism. So the fact that women will go back to their violent partner. And often that hinders the healing process. How do police officers deal with that? And what can be done to offer better support? How could we help women to not go back to their violent partners? Kimberly, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much for that. And I think if you look at some of the research that is being conducted across the country within police service, so we're looking to improve the accuracy of us forecasting high harm intimate partner violence offenders, and we're looking to assess the reduction of repeat victimization from an offender perspective. We need to work collaboratively with our service partners to ensure that victims have the right tools to support them as they move forward away from the abuse, or if they do return to individuals that have abused them in the past, they need to have the support that if they need to exit again, that they have had a successful assessment done of their situation, and they have a program that they can exit as soon as possible.
20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Okay, so 20 seconds. So the importance of studying what is helping elsewhere could have an impact on what's happening here. That could help us to make improvements for services to victims here in Canada. Yes.
And just looking at Claire's Law and some other studies around the world, and that is the work that we are doing with the association also.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're now going to move it over for the next 6 minutes to Leah Gazan. Leah, you've got the floor.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the panelists for being here today. My first question is for the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. We've heard on other panels, of course, many individuals, women, diverse gendered individuals fleeing violence often don't feel safe going to police. And I would say that's particularly pronounced for Indigenous peoples that have historically had a very violent colonial history with police, including with the development of police, as you know, RCMP, which was formed to forcibly remove Indigenous peoples off their land, and that kind of violent colonial relationship, as we saw in Wet'suwet'en territory, with RCMP taking down a door with a chainsaw and an axe and a guard dog with against two unarmed Indigenous women on unceded territories. We see that kind of violence again continue. Or Aisha Hudson, who was shot by the Winnipeg City Police, 16 years old. There's currently an inquest happening in my city. Which is why it's not surprising that in the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, there were a number of calls for justice specific to police. Want to read you 9.5 specifically related to the Canadian Associations of Chiefs of Police. Call for Justice 9.5 calls for it. We call upon all police services for the standardization of protocols and policies and practices that ensure that all cases of missing and murdering Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA people are thoroughly investigated. This includes the following measures. This one's specific to the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, which is, it says, create a national strategy through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police to ensure consistency in reporting mechanisms for reporting missing Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA people. This could be developed in conjunction with the implementation of a national database. And this is a very important one. I'll give you an example and then I'll give you time to respond. For example, often it's very common in Winnipeg for Indigenous women to go missing. It's like a daily occurrence. We've had cases in Winnipeg where they actually use people's mugshots and put that out in the public, which is terribly dehumanizing, speaking for the need to change protocol. Where is the Canadian Association on the Chiefs of Police on implementing that call for justice?
Thank you very much. With the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee focusing on this work along with the Victims of Crime Committee, we are part of our strategies, and it is included in the Intimate Partner Violence Framework and the Sexual Violence Framework, looking at our responses and how we support those that are vulnerable in our community, such as the Indigenous girls, women, and children, looking at women that are living with disabilities, the LGBTQ2 spirited work, sex workers, older women. This is something that is part of what we're looking to do. And we talk about consistent language, consistent tools, whether you are from the Northwest Territories.
Yes. So just within that, I know,
Yes.
so this is my concern. It's my concern with the federal government. So, as well. So we've had the national inquiry, of course, came out in 2019. There's actually no targeted money directly attached to murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. I asked the minister, where are you at in implementing the calls for justice? We're working on it. So I'm asking you, just very straightforward, where are you at in terms of final implementation of that call for justice?
Sorry, apologize for that. I had you on mute. We are working as an association through the multiple levels of government, and we are working very closely with the RCMP on the implementation of not just this area, but all of the areas in regards to it. So the framework is about policy development, and it is the responsibilities of the services to ensure that they have policies in place.
Sounds,
and we do
1 minute left. 1 minute.
With all due respect, it sounds like it hasn't been implemented. It's still a work in progress, which is concerning. My question is for Mr. Jovi, which is a pretty interesting name. You talked about how a lot of times families or like kids feel have difficulty coming forward. They feel shame. Is part of that kind of fear related to worry that kids will be apprehended into child welfare systems, like, keeping family secrets as a fear of families being separated?
From our level of interaction, I can see where that would be, because we have heard that, but directly from our kids, it's about not wanting to hurt mom and or dad. We have, in our cases, we do have a variety of children that are dealing with the parental alienation issues, and that they're afraid that if they say something to dad or to mom, the other parent might get mad at them. They might get in trouble for that. Directly from what we hear, it's not regarding the removal. It's more about hurting their parent that they're not mostly with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go on to our second round. We will have 5 minutes for both the CPC and Liberals, and 2.5 minutes for both the NDP and Bloc. So I'm going to pass it over to Shelby. Shelby, you have 5.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you to all the witnesses that are present today. First question would be directed more towards, I believe, Ms. Greenwood. When officers see signs of intimate partner and domestic violence, they see the sexual or physical type of abuse. So my question is, when there's other types of abuse, like emotional and financial, it's a lot more difficult to see. So is there a process that is followed, and does that particular process, is it different for those that are teenagers versus those that are older adults?
So there's many parts to your question there. When we look at the patterns of intimate partner violence, it encompasses many areas such as the hurt, humiliation, intimidation, exploitation, isolation. So these are things that police officers are aware of. We need to ensure they have more training in this area, because most of our intimate partner violence response traditionally is on the physical piece. A one incident, police are called, conduct the investigation. We know that this issue is much more complex than this, and we want to ensure that our officers on the front lines have the tools that they can identify, whether we capture it as coercive control. We've heard at the other panel some financial impacts and isolation, denying women and young people access to information. So is there a difference between how we respond to intimate partner violence in youth and adults? Yes, there is, because the complexities change. The relationships tend to be quite different, may not be as long-term in the youth as we see in adults. So key piece is working collaboratively with the other agencies to ensure that officers have all the tools that they need. They have the education, they have the awareness, so they make the right decision when one group of officers attend or a next group of officers respond in these complex investigations.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Further, we can all recognize that the format in which way intimate partner and domestic violence happens in Canada is very different. It's evolved in the last 10 years. And how are we keeping our force current? Like, I certainly applaud everyone for what they're able to do. I'm not in that field for a reason, and I give hero cookies to everyone that does that because it's quite admirable. But is there a way to keep them current? And those, just because it's changing so much.
It is changing so much. And when we look at the work that's been done with the national framework specifically to intimate partner violence, we are now looking at adding on to it, whether we're speaking about coercive control, whether we are speaking in regards to trauma-informed approach. If you look back in the 80s, when I started policing, intimate partner violence was approached very, very differently. And we were able to swing the pendulum, and we were able to mandated charges. Now we know that victims come forward at different times and disclose differently, and our members have to be regularly trained and be aware of these things. And at a national level and at provincial and local areas, there is specific training around intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and trauma-informed.
1 minute left.
Thank you. My next question is directed at Mr. Giolvi. I loved what you said with regards to education, awareness, communication. I think that's key with whatever we're talking about. But in more specifically to, you noted that ages 15 to 24 is a real prevalent age. I really think we need to speak in their language. Are you having communication and advocating on levels where that age group is? For example, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. Are you at that level?
We are at that level. We make it an attention to be on those levels. So not only are we helping to provide them with guidance and information through that, we're able to monitor what the traffic is on there. And so that as we see things coming up, we're able to take it back into program and directly bring up those issues to help advocate, but also help keep the youth informed. Through our family program, then we take that and we talk directly to the parents of what issues they need to be aware of, what things kids are looking at today, and try to get a full encompassing partnership with the families and the youth. Because we know that when the families are involved in what their children are doing, kids are more likely to be safe. But also when you talk to the kids directly and you give them the respect that they deserve, they're more willing to listen and be cooperative in conversations. You know, just like us as adults, we don't always like being told what to do. Kids like it even less.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn it over to Mark Saray. Mark, you have 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Your presentations were great. My first question is for Ms. Greenwood or Monsieur Lanouette. For the definitions of abuse, there's the criminal code, there are circumstances in which your hands might be tied. Could you tell us more on the definitions of abuse and what we can do at the federal level? And how is that linked with the more cultural aspect, for example, to help us with our report? Answer. With regards to the definitions, when we're talking about coercive control, it englobes abuse, intimate partner abuse. So whether it be financial or psychological violence, that is covered. And we want to examine this. And with social media, we have GPSs on our phone. people can be followed by their partners, especially if their partner wants to control them. And so that's the idea behind coercive control, and it's key to be able to define what coercive control is and to make it an offense in the criminal code. So that's the first thing. And secondly, I'm not sure I quite understood the second part of your question on diversity. Perhaps Kimberly understood?
Kimberly, est-ce que vous avez...
Kimberly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and so really, when you look at definitions of abuse, have your experience more on the cultural side, religion side? Is there any recommendations along those ends for minority groups?
So the position that we've taken from the CACP is we looked at the World Health Organization when we talk about intimate partner violence. So it refers to behaviors of an intimate partner or ex-partner, that is something that we have to keep in mind, that causes physical, sexual, psychological harm, which the director has spoken about, but it includes aggression and coercion and controlling behavior. So it is the dynamics between the power and control, and we recognize that the diversity within our country will impact those that feel free to come forward and report intimate partner violence. So we need to ensure that people feel comfortable coming forward to the police, and if they're not comfortable coming forward to the police, that we have third parties and organizations that can help people feel comfortable coming forward, or even using tools where it doesn't have to be the individual. So even if it's an app, for example, to come forward and report things such as sexual violence or intimate partner violence, and at least we have some record of what is occurring so we can offer services that aren't through the justice system.
And that links into a question to Mr. Govey. When we look at on the prevention side or the social media side, obviously the U.S. Congress has had, a lot of social media companies come to testify at committees at TikTok, and especially the youth or the exploitation of youth. Do you have any specific recommendations for us from a federal government to look at the social media aspect, especially related to youth?
Well, definitely needs to be a deeper look into the protection around the way that the stats and the information is being used and shared for these children and youth that are on there. And I do say children because we know that there are kids under the age of 13 that are finding ways onto the social media platforms. I do believe that across Canada, our police services are doing great work behind the scenes to ensure that predators are not getting access to our children. But we also need to bring greater awareness on educating our parents, especially our new immigrants' parents that don't have access to these forms of technology. As mentioned earlier, technology accessibility, especially in marginalized communities, is very limited due to the costs. So there needs to be greater attention put on safeguards that not only kids can understand at their level, but the parents can appreciate and help implement.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
You had 10 seconds, Mark. Okay.
You're wonderful. Thank you.
If everyone could get that on record, that'd be fantastic. Anyway, we're going to now move over. We have 2.5 minutes left for Adrienne. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to once again thank the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. And for my second turn, I would like to talk about prevention with Mr. Jovey and Mr. Kelly. In Quebec, we have a health and social services system that is quite well integrated to help victims, but there's also the fact that we need to work on the financial means. So can you tell us the importance of eliminating barriers for transfers, whether it be for direct health for organizations or for shelters who help victims, or organizations that work with violent men, or other social services? But of course, in talking about this, we need to talk about the health transfers so that the funds can be distributed to organizations working with victims. I would like to hear your points of view on that, please.
I'll just say a little bit, so I'll leave most time for Tim because to speak on it. We have a fantastic relationship with our national body, BGC Canada, who does a lot of the higher level advocating on this process. And they've been in conversation with many leaders across all the provinces to ensure that when there's funding availability, it does flow through the national board so that the organizations below, in our case as a federation model, the right communities are getting the right kind of funding and access to resources. I'll turn the rest of my time over to Tim.
Thanks. I've really found this whole conversation interesting because I do think there's this hole in the middle of it, which are those that are causing harm, and how do we actually take that piece on? I agree that there is funding barriers that need to be looked at, whether it's looking at alternative ways of addressing men's violence, whether you're working with traditional practices within Indigenous communities, or you're looking at the barriers that are in place for biracial and Black communities accessing services when they don't trust the police response that's happening historically to them. So I do think that there are options that we need to consider if we're actually going to take this on in a serious kind of way and provide off-ramps for people to actually access services that don't necessarily involve formal processes like criminal justice and police responses. So I do think if we really want to take a look at this and want to try to get ahead of this issue, we do need to look at where that funding streams through, how that works, and to support women's services, and then begin to really take seriously how do we open up accesses to individuals who want to deal with this issue but don't necessarily trust the systems that are in place.
Thank you so much. We're going to now move it over for our last bit of questioning with Leah Gazan. Leah, 2.5 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. My last question is for Mr. Jovie. I love the Boys and Girls Club. Stringy Reddy in Manitoba was the founder of the Boys and Girls Club, an icon and just loved in our community, and has managed to be the leader of many other critical programs for boys and girls in our neighborhood and non-binary young people. As a former educator, I see the value. I see the value in what you do, and I know that there needs to be a clear connection with schools. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that the Boys and Girls Club is known about, is that your seamless integration into schools. Why is that model important, particularly when working with kids that may be living in environments where there's violence?
It's very important that we're all working together. I know everyone uses the line, we're truly working together. We need to make sure that the language and the lessons that are being taught in school, we at BGCPO or Boys and Girls Club, that we're echoing those messages. We want to make sure that the children and the youth, that there's no misinterpretation, there's no confusion over the messaging. It's we all all of us who work with kids or have kids, it's about repetition and making sure that the kids are hearing as much of the positive messaging and accurate messaging that they need. And then as my earlier point, making sure that when you get the parents involved so that they know what's going on. Many of us as parents, we don't find out sometimes at the last second what's happening with our kids. So when we have the opportunity to get the parents involved, be it through the school councils, the teacher parent interaction, or BGC through our program interactions and volunteering, that's where we see the real changes. And it comes down to those true collaborations, and it comes down to just your basic communication and speaking to the level in which the individual you're engaging.
25 seconds left, Leah.
Oh, thank you. And in terms of engaging parents, or caregivers, what kind of activities do you do in terms of even educating around violence or family violence?
Yep. So we any information that we provide to our youth, we provide to the parents. We offer them outside of programming their own workshops or groups to come in and speak about the stuff they're hearing from their kids, but also to speak about what is their concerns and issues. And through BGC Canada, that's where a lot of our advocacy work has been very much focused on getting the messaging across the country on ways to prevent, to ensure that kids continue to strive and thrive.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'd really like to thank Michael, Kimberly, Francis, and Tim. Our hour has come to an end, but it has been fantastic testimony that we've got. Thank you, everybody. And to everybody, happy International Women's Day on Tuesday. I look forward to seeing everybody back at the committee on Tuesday, March the 22nd. See you then, and today's meeting adjourned.